The second stand. The first thing Jonah Mercer noticed after the detonator was taken from his hands was that victory did not sound victorious. It sounded like medics shouting triage codes, like someone crying behind a shield cushion, like boots hammering over polished floors slick with coolant, blood, and shattered glass. Like station alarms trying to decide whether the emergency had passed, while the room itself clearly had not agreed. He stood at the center of Hallowmere's dedication hall, with smoke hanging low under the vaulted ceiling and the taste of metal at the back of his throat, and understood with brutal clarity that surviving a disaster was not the same thing as escaping it. Vorsen Hale lay dead 3 feet away. The pulse detonator had been contained. The Ashen Creed strike force had been broken. And still the hall looked like something sacred had been dragged through violence and not yet convinced it could be clean again. Nicera's hands had left his shoulders, but only because she had turned immediately to command. Seal the north ingress. Confirm all secondary devices. No body leaves the hall uncleared, she snapped into the open channel. Medical priority to civilians first, then station staff, then tactical. Move. It was astonishing, Jonah thought dimly, how quickly she could transform fear into ordered force. Kalis crouched beside the dead Creed commander, stripped a hidden blade from his inner sleeve, checked the body for secondary triggers, then looked up at Jonah with silver eyes still bright from combat. "You are an offense to planning," she said. Jonah managed a breath that almost became a laugh. "I'm getting that a lot." That was not a joke. No, he said. Maven was already moving through the hall in widening circles, not with the physical velocity of Nicera or Kalis, but with a strategist's terrible speed, seeing chains, not moments. She spoke into 3 channels at once, voice clean, emotionless, and therefore more urgent than panic. Capture living infiltrators before field execution. Preserve weapons. Preserve masks. Preserve station feeds. I want synchronized civilian footage cross-tagged with security angle 13, balcony overwatch, and all public relay streams. No visual gaps. She turned slightly, listening. Yes, all of them. If this becomes testimony, it becomes complete. That word cut through Jonah's haze. Testimony. Not merely aftermath. Not merely cleanup. Meaning. Below the ringing in his ears and the residual adrenaline crawling through his limbs, he understood what she was doing. The Ashen Creed had come to Hallowmere to write doctrine in blood. Maven was already making sure the surviving witnesses would write the answer instead. A medic team arrived around Jonah before he could protest. Human and Valdir, one in white-gray exchange uniform, the other in dark treatment layers with harmonic coils at the wrist. "Sit," the human medic said. "I'm fine." "Sit," the Valdir healer said, and made it sound like the first speaker had been extending unnecessary kindness. Jonah sat on the nearest intact section of dice because apparently there were moments when resistance became undignified. Hands moved over him at once. Scanner wand, armor checks, pupil light, seal integrity review, rapid palpation around the ribs where old plasma injuries still remembered they had opinions. No penetration, the human medic reported. Harmonic spikes elevated. Adrenal load extreme. Muscular overextension left thigh and lower back. The Valdir healer added, possible hairline fracture if he continues pretending flesh is theory. Jonah opened his mouth. The healer looked at him. He closed it again. Across the hall, civilians were being moved into ordered clusters. The sight should have looked terrible. It did look terrible. And yet within the terrible, there was something else. Humans and Valdir moving together without hesitation. Medical shield teams protecting whoever was nearest, not whoever matched bloodline. A human nurse pressing cloth to the wound of a Valdir diplomat, while a Valdir guard carried an unconscious human technician clear of shattered support glass. No time for rhetoric. Only truth in action. This, Jonah thought, was what the Creed had not understood. In actual crisis, ideology had to compete with reflex, and reflex, if taught well enough, revealed what people really believed. He lifted his head and looked toward the upper viewing chamber. Elson was gone. The reinforced glass still held the print of where her hand had been. A cold thread of fear tightened inside him. He twisted to find Nicera. She saw it instantly and crossed the floor in 3 strides. "The princess is secure," she said before he could ask. Jonah exhaled once. "She is with her grandmother?" "Yes." The answer should have settled him. It did, partly. But the image remained. Elson behind the glass, watching the hall become war, seeing him run toward the detonator rather than away. A child did not forget moments like that. Neither, he suspected, did grandmothers with relic rooms full of old losses. Nicera's gaze hardened slightly as she read the direction of his thoughts. "Do not do that." Jonah frowned. "Do what?" "Move from relief into guilt because others witnessed your choice." He stared at her. She did not blink. "You are too transparent tonight," she said. "Feels rude to mention it. It is meant as corrective care." That somehow steadied him more than comfort might have. Before he could answer, the hall doors at the far end opened. The shift in the room was immediate and absolute. Not because more troops entered. Not because the danger had returned. Because Elira Valathorn did. She came in without hurry and transformed the temperature of the hall simply by arriving intact. Wore black. No crown. Severin at her right. 2 house guards behind and then gone from relevance the moment she stepped past them. Every person in the hall who could still stand did so or tried to. Elira did not acknowledge the gesture first. Her eyes moved through the destruction with sovereign speed, cataloging damage, dead survivors, structural burns, shield fractures, unexploded residue, blood spread, recovered bodies, captured operatives. Then she saw Jonah. She did not come to him immediately. Jonah understood why at once, and the understanding itself hurt. Because she was ruler first in this moment. Because if she crossed the hall as grandmother, as private witness, as the woman who had once heard her brother call through smoke, she would unravel the shape the room needed from her. Because command had to hold before grief could. So she went first to the civilians. To the wounded exchange delegates, to the surviving station director. To a kneeling medic team trying to stabilize a human service worker hit in the shoulder during the first volley. To the dead. Always the dead. She stopped once beside a fallen Hallowmere security officer, a woman Jonah had glimpsed only earlier at a checkpoint, and lowered her head for the space of 1 breath. Not more. Enough to make the act visible. Enough to say no life here becomes incidental because politics caused the scene. Only after that did she come to him. By then the hall had shifted again. Less battle now, more reckoning. Elira stopped directly before Jonah where he sat on the damaged dais under half-open armor. Medics reluctantly stepped back and Nicera moved 1 pace aside without truly leaving. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Jonah saw at once what the others likely missed. Not that Elira was calm, that she was controlling catastrophe by layers. The sovereign face was there. The command. The old discipline. But beneath it, deep enough that only someone looking for the fracture line would see, lived the full force of what this had cost her to watch. He had gone over the balcony. Again he had run toward the center. Again a child she loved had witnessed him standing where death was thickest. History had not repeated precisely. It had come close enough to touch the wound. "You are alive," Elira said. It was not a question. Jonah nodded once. "Yeah." Then more quietly, "So are they." Her gaze sharpened on him, not because the answer offended. Because it revealed exactly where his moral attention had landed first. Yes, he had survived, but the hall had not become massacre. The civilians lived. The children on the target list would keep existing because Hallowmere had held. Elira understood that answer immediately, and Jonah saw the understanding move through her like pain and respect braided too tightly to separate. "Yes," she said, "so are they." Severin came to stand slightly behind her shoulder, reading the room with a marshal's eye. "The soft target channels?" Elira asked without turning. Maven answered from across the hall. "No strikes. All distributed assets appear to have been contingent on visual confirmation of failure or principal absence. Once the hall did not fall, the external cells stalled. Intercept teams are moving now." Severin's mouth hardened. "Good." No triumph in it. Only grim utility. Jonah looked around the chamber again. Smoke still lifting. Shattered glass under red emergency light. the great suspended sculpture above them turning slowly, as though nothing in the hall had changed the mathematics of its movement. A few civilians beginning shakily to emerge from behind shield barriers and look at the center where the detonator had almost made theology of them all. Then he realized something else was happening. They were looking at him. Not all of them. Not immediately, but enough. The human mechanic in dark armor, the man who had jumped the balcony, the one the Creed had named False Bridge, the one who had put hands on the detonator and not let the sermon go off. The gaze made his skin prickle, not because it was admiration, because it was the beginning of narrative. Elira saw it too. Of course she did. She half-turned, catching Maven's eye across the hall. "Now," she said. Maven nodded once and moved at once. She was joined by 2 Hallowmere record officers, one human, one Valdir, both already carrying active witness tablets. They began not at Jonah, but at the room. The dead infiltrators. The disguised weapons trays, the shield panels, the mixed security response, the detonator containment pod, the wounded being treated across species lines, the civilian clusters, the surviving delegates, the whole picture. Not hero isolated from context. Context first. Jonah understood the tactic and felt immediate gratitude for it. If the story was told right, Hallowmere would not become Jonah Mercer's singular courage against evil. It would become what it had actually been. A planned trap met by integrated defense, a joint architecture that held, a false gospel answered by people refusing to let their categories determine who deserved saving. Still, stories like centers. And he was standing in one. Elira looked at him with that same grave exactness. "Can you stand?" Jonah frowned. "Probably." Nicera said, "That is not an answer." Jonah glanced at the medics, then back at Elira. "Yes." "Then stand." He did. Slowly, with help only from his own balance and a surge of offended pride that Kalis would later call medically stupid but emotionally useful. The hall noticed. A hush spread outward in small, overlapping waves, not silence, but the sound of attention becoming collective. Elira turned then, not to him, but to the room. And because she was Elira Valathorn, the room turned with her. No dice, no throne, no herald. Just a wrecked dedication hall and a sovereign who understood that judgment had already begun, whether anyone announced it or not. "Hallowmere stands," she said. Her voice carried clean through smoke and alarm and shaken breath. No amplification that Jonah could hear. Only authority practiced into inevitability. The Ashen Creed came to make this chamber proof that alliance is weakness, that shared mercy is corruption, that fear has the right to decide who may live. She let her gaze move over the wounded, the medics, the mixed security formations still holding lines. Instead, they have revealed themselves. Not long. Enough. They disguised themselves as service, as medicine, as hospitality. They carried slaughter into a hall dedicated to healing and called that purity. The words struck harder because there was no rhetorical excess in them, only moral naming. "They failed," Elira said. This time the line landed like judgment. Not because all had gone well, because enough had survived to make the failure visible. She turned slightly and her gaze found Jonah, then moved beyond him to the civilians and responders whose lives now formed the real center of the story. They failed because Human and Valdir stood together without hesitation, because medics treated life before bloodline, because guards answered need before ideology, because those they call weak chose structure instead of panic and courage instead of spectacle. Jonah felt the room take that in, not a victory speech, a reframing. The hall would not remember only the leap. It would remember why the leap mattered inside a wider answer. Then Elira did something unexpected. She beckoned Jonah forward. He obeyed before thinking. 1 pace, 2. Stopping just within her line rather than beside her throne distance because there was no throne here and because instinct told him she wantedness not display. She looked at him once, a question without words. "Are you steady enough?" He nodded, once. She turned back to the hall. "This man was named by our enemies as proof of contamination," she said. "Today he was meant to die in their chosen script so they might teach fear more effectively." Jonah felt the old unease rising, the danger of becoming symbol, lesson, relic in real time. Then Elira finished the sentence. He refused them authorship. The line struck the hall with more force than applause ever could have, because it named the true battle. Not merely survival, meaning. Jonah looked at her sharply. She did not look back. She was looking at the witnesses, the recorders, the wounded, the officers, the civilians who would carry this out of Hallowmere in dozens of versions that would shape outer systems by morning. If you speak of this day, Elira said, speak fully. Speak of the infiltrators who wore service garb to murder the unarmed. Speak of the human medic who shielded a Valdir delegate. Speak of the station officers who held their line. Speak of the shield teams. Speak of those who did not run from one another when violence demanded division. Her eyes hardened. Do not simplify survival into myth and thereby serve the same hunger in cleaner language. There. The instruction against the wound becoming theater, against courage turned into spectacle, against memory taught wrong. Jonah felt the truth of it hit as hard as anything in the relic room had. Around the hall, several heads lowered, not in submission, in understanding. The surviving witnesses were being commissioned morally, not just formally. If they carried Hallowmere honestly, it would become testimony. If they carried it lazily, it would become one more beautiful false story about solitary heroes and inevitable enemies. Elira would permit neither. Severin stepped forward then, voice cutting in with military force where hers had governed morally. All recovered Creed operatives will be held for tribunal under anti-war doctrine. Every recording from this station is now sovereign evidence. Anyone found altering, suppressing, or privately recirculating edited footage will answer as collaborator. That changed the temperature in another direction. Judgment, now. Not vague outrage, not revenge. Process with teeth. Good, Jonah thought, because mercy without consequence would be decoration here. And Elira, for all she loved memory and restraint, had never mistaken decoration for rule. The hall began to move again after that, not chaotically, purposely. Witness officers took statements, medical teams completed transfers, security re-cleared the upper access lines. Station staff who had been frozen in shock now had orders to follow and therefore a shape for their fear. Jonah stood where he was for a little longer until the first wave of attention had moved elsewhere. Then the body collected its debt. Pain arrived from every direction at once. Not catastrophic. Just honest. The left thigh Kalis had warned him about. Lower back. One shoulder where he had hit the floor badly after the balcony drop. A deep exhaustion in his ribs where memory still lived from Bastion reach. Nicera was beside him before he could shift his weight to hide it. Sit. No, you are limping. I'm standing in public. That is not an argument. Kalis joined them, having apparently finished threatening a captured infiltrator into understanding his own mortality. He is limping, she confirmed, also being publicly stubborn, which is different. Jonah looked between them. Do you two ever miss opportunities to conspire? Not when your joints are involved, Kalis said. Elira, who had been speaking quietly with the station director, turned her head just enough to observe the exchange. For 1 second, the sovereign face eased, not with amusement, with relief contained so tightly it nearly resembled severity. Take him to treatment, she said. Jonah started to object. Elira's gaze fixed on him fully. That, she said, is not a request. He raised both hands a fraction. Understood. Nicera touched his elbow, not quite support, not quite command, both at once, and guided him toward the side treatment corridor. As they passed beneath the still-turning sculpture, Jonah looked up at it again. Two forms almost touching, almost, not yet joined. Still moving. He thought of Hallowmere as it had been meant to appear, inevitable cooperation, beautiful and rational and clean. Then he thought of Hallowmere as it now truly was, surviving, smoking, frightened, morally clarified, much less graceful, much more real. The station had become something stronger than a monument. It had become evidence. Treatment afterward was undignified. Jonah accepted this because pain had by now stripped away whatever theatrical ego he might once have nurtured. He sat shirtless in a side medical bay while Sarismere herself checked the suit impact bruising, reset one overstressed support brace, and informed him in tones of measured disappointment that adaptive biology did not grant immunity from stupid collision decisions. That phrase, Jonah muttered, has now entered too many official records. Because you keep justifying it. Across the bay, Kalis leaned against a diagnostic column and looked entirely too pleased with how alive he remained. Nicera stood by the sealed entry with her arms folded, saying nothing, which meant she was still angry enough that words would become inefficient. Maven arrived halfway through the scan with 3 witness reports already indexed and a data slate full of emergent public reactions from authorized station channels. "Hallowmere is holding," she said without preamble. "Civilian accounts are aligning usefully. The mixed response footage is already outperforming the Creed's preliminary martyr language on outer relay clusters." Cirrus did not look up from the scanner moving over Jonah's ribs. "Say that in healer." "The truth is spreading faster than the lie," Maven said. That, Jonah thought, was worth pain. Nicera finally spoke. "Casualties?" Maven's eyes lowered to the slate. 3 dead in the hall, 2 station security, 1 civilian delegate, 14 wounded, none critical now that the pulse device failed. Outer target cells intercepted in 2 sectors. 1 school vessel rerouted before engagement. No child casualties. Jonah closed his eyes briefly. No child casualties. The line entered him and stayed. History had not ended the same way. Again. When he opened his eyes, Elira was in the doorway. She did not enter at once. She only stood there a moment, hearing the report finish, taking the room in. Then she came in. Sarah stepped back from Jonah's side with a bow of the head. Nicera straightened. Kalis moved off the column. Maven went still as usual, which on her meant nothing and everything. Elira looked first at Saris. "He will recover?" Saris answered with complete professional coolness, which Jonah suspected hid annoyance at the question being asked where the patient could hear it. "Yes, Majesty. Bruising, overstrain, 1 minor fracture line reinforcing itself already. He will hate movement for 2 days and disobey by the 2nd. Kalis said. "That estimate is generous." Jonah looked at her. "I remember saving your life on the balcony flank." Kalis's silver eyes narrowed. "Do not become historically selective." Elira's gaze shifted to Maven. "The witness record?" "Strong," Maven said. "We have 3 synchronized civilian feeds showing mixed response defense before Jonah's engagement with Hale. 2 med station angles showing the Creed's disguised infiltration. Full visual on the detonator. And the station delegates are already repeating your instruction. Not hero myth, shared witness, integrated defense." Elira nodded once. "Good. Not because narrative was vanity. Because truth required protection from simplification, the same way bodies required shielding from shrapnel." Only then did she look at Jonah. There in the smaller medical bay light, without the hall and its witnesses between them, the force of the day moved across her face more visibly than before. Not only relief. Not only command. The old wound disturbed and answered both. "You came back," she said. Jonah looked at the return band on his wrist, then back at her. "Yeah." The room went quiet. Elson's promise had entered with him. "Return as yourself. Come back before you become a lesson." And here he was. Not yet relic, not yet story. Still bruised, still breathing, still annoying Kalis on principle. Elira took 1 step closer. "Remember this," she said, voice low enough now that it was for him first, the room second. "Hallowmere must never become the day Jonah Mercer leapt a balcony." He blinked once, then understood. The warning against reduction, again, against solitary myth. Against the theft. "It becomes the day the hall held," he said. Elira's eyes sharpened. "Yes," he nodded slowly, "the day the lie showed itself. Yes, the day medicine and security and civilians and everyone else refused the script." For the first time since entering, something like pride, not in triumph, but in right understanding, touched her face. "Yes." Jonah sat a little straighter despite the protesting fracture line. "Then that's how I'll tell it too." Then Elira inclined her head, not to a subject, not fully to an equal either. History was too asymmetrical for easy categories. To a witness who had understood the burden of meaning. "That," she said, "is how testimony survives victory." Later, much later, when the station had stabilized enough that departure could be considered, and the dead had been named properly, and the surviving infiltrators moved under sealed guard, Jonah found a moment alone at the edge of one of Hallowmere's auxiliary viewing galleries. Below him, workers already moved through the damaged ceremony hall, clearing scorched debris, recovering shattered glass, resetting what could be reset. Not erasing, repairing. Important difference. The station still stood, the sculpture still turned. The hall had fire marks now. Good, Jonah thought. Let it keep some. Let peace remember what was attempted against it. Behind him, the gallery door opened. He did not have to turn to know who it was. Elira came to stand beside the glass. No attendants. No guards visible. Though Jonah had no doubt many existed just beyond sensible sight, for a while neither of them spoke. Below, a team of human and Valdir technicians worked together to remove the detonator scorch pattern from the central floor without damaging the fused stone beneath it. Finally, Jonah said, "I keep thinking about what Hale said." Elira did not ask which part. She had heard it too. "They will make you bridge until the bridge burns." "He wanted me to believe connection only exists to be consumed," Jonah said. Elira's reflection in the glass looked older than the stars behind it. Yes. Jonah watched the crews below. Maybe he wasn't completely wrong about the cost. No, Elira said. He was wrong about the meaning. Jonah turned slightly toward her. She continued, still looking down at the hall. "Bridges are built to bear weight," she said. "That weight is not evidence of failure, only of use. What matters is whether those who cross remember the bridge is made of living labor and not treat it as self-replacing stone." There it was again, the body attached to the person, the refusal to let symbol consume the living. Jonah let the words settle. Then he said, "I think that's the part I'm still learning." Elira looked at him then, and the old burden in her face had eased by a fraction. "Yes," she said, "so am I." He smiled faintly. That, more than anything else, told him the cost of Hallowmere had not only been injury and blood and near disaster. It had been revelation, to the hall, to the witnesses, to the creed, to the alliance, and to them. Because the second stand had not ended when the detonator was taken away. It continued here, in the aftermath, where the living refused both martyr myth and purity doctrine, and instead told the harder truth, that courage means more when it returns. That survival is communal when honestly witnessed, and that memory becomes testimony only when the living carry it without distorting who it cost. Down below, the repair teams lifted the last broken segment of decorative railing from the center floor. The hall opened again around the wound. Not whole, not yet, but undeniably standing. And in that standing, Hallowmere had become more dangerous to the Ashen Creed than any planned ceremony ever could have been. It had become proof that fire in the hall did not end in sermon, it ended in witness.